How are you? My name is Andrea Reed, and I welcome you back to this Bible study. So, tonight we're in Exodus chapter 10. This chapter continues to detail the plagues sent onto Egypt, and our study in this chapter will cover the plague of the locust and the plague of darkness. So we will see that things intensify as Pharaoh continues to refuse to let the people of Israel go free. So let's go straight into our study, starting with verse 1. Then the Lord said to Moses, "Go to Pharaoh, for I have hardened his heart and the hearts of his officials, so that I may perform these signs of mine among them, that you may tell your children and grandchildren how I dealt harshly with the Egyptians and how I performed my signs among them, and that you may know that I am the Lord." So, believers, God has hardened Pharaoh's heart for his glory, right? And we see in this scripture that God uses these plagues as a demonstration of his power, sovereignty, and faithfulness. The Israelites were given a powerful testimony to pass down through generations after them. It's important, believers, to share our testimonies with our family and really all who we come into contact with. Psalms 145, verse 4, speaks to that, right? It says, "One generation shall commend your works to another and shall declare your mighty acts." So, believers, share with your children, if God has brought you out of something. Amen. For some of you have had some seriously dark past, right? That God saved you from, and it was only through his deliverance, grace, and mercy that you came out. Like God brought some of you out of addiction. He got you clean and sober. He took you off those streets of living a life in chaos, just living to obtain drugs. Who did it? None other than God, right? For some of you, God took you away from people that were only using you and exploiting you, right? And it's exploiting you for your bodies, exploiting you for what you could do for them, right? And God took you out of those relationships. While others have suffered serious financial hardships, right? Through our own improper stewardship over the blessings and resources that God has given us, right? But it was only through his grace and mercy that we were able to come out of those situations and able to financially, get back on track, And for some of you sisters out there, and me included, God took you out of some seriously abusive relationships that you fought tooth and nail with him to stay in. But you didn't even see it until years later that God was doing you a favor. He saved your life, by ending those relationships, and so and your kids are going to go through the same things, believers. They're going to go through the same situations, so they need to hear how you got out. And how did you get out? By God, by turning yourself and those situations over to God. So Psalm 107 verse 2 says, "We have nothing to give of value, but he asks for us to tell others about him." And how better than to worship God and glorify God, but to tell how he saved you, but to tell of his good works, his miracles and blessings in your life. How better else to worship him and glorify him? So, and I tell people all the time, believers, of how God saved me from sin, death, and destruction. You know, I do that. Why? To glorify his name, and to also to help save others. So don't be ashamed to tell people your story, because we all go through situations, but we seek God, we learn from our situations, and we grow. And if we're lucky, right, we can help others in the process. So continuing on in the chapter, verse 3. So Moses and Aaron went to Pharaoh and said to him, "This is what the Lord, the God of the Hebrews, says. How long will you refuse to humble yourself before me? Let my people go, so that they may worship me. If you refuse to let them go, I will bring locusts into your country tomorrow. They will cover the face of the ground so that it cannot be seen. They will devour what little you have left after the hail, including every tree that is growing in your fields. They will fill your houses and those of all your officials and all the Egyptians, something neither your parents nor your ancestors have ever seen from the day they settled in this land till now." Then Moses turned and left Pharaoh. So, believers, the consequences of Pharaoh's disobedience to God just keeps increasing. You guys do see that, right? Now we see that the little agriculture that they had left after the previous destruction to the crops is now in jeopardy of being destroyed too. And let's discuss the speed and impact of locust destruction on agriculture, so we can really appreciate the level of destruction this type of plague causes, right? So a locust swarm can cover up to 150 kilometers, about 93 miles in a day, right? And a single swarm can contain billions of locusts, consuming the equivalent of food for thousands of people daily. Swarms can destroy crops and vegetation in hours to days. So, depending on the size of the swarm and the density of the vegetation. So, reports indicate that a swarm can consume crops over an area of 1,000 square kilometers, which is about 386 square miles in a matter of days. So we see that this type of plague will reap catastrophic destruction on the Egyptian people, So continuing on in the chapter, verse 7, Pharaoh's officials said to him, "How long will this man be a snare to us? Let the people go so that they may worship the Lord their God. Do you not realize that Egypt is ruined?" So believers, things are so bad that the Egyptian officials are crying out for the release of the Israelites. And it is quite clear that Pharaoh's hardened heart condition really affected his judgment and his ability to think rationally, right? And make logical decisions as a leader. And this gives us a good understanding of the importance of examining our own heart conditions, believers, so that we do not fall victim to the same consequences of our decisions, behaviors, and most importantly, our sinful ways, right? So, continuing on, verse 8. Then Moses and Aaron were brought back to Pharaoh. Go worship the Lord your God, he said. But tell me who will be going. Moses answered, we will go with our young and our old, with our sons and our daughters, and with our flocks and herds, because we are to celebrate a festival to the Lord. Pharaoh said, the Lord be with you if I let you go, along with your women and children. Clearly, you are bent on evil. So he thinks they're up to no good. They're not coming back. Continuing on, verse 11. No, have only the men go and worship the Lord, since that's what you have been asking for. Then Moses and Aaron were driven out of Pharaoh's presence. So, believers, Pharaoh only wants to be partially obedient to God. How can we relate this to our own walk with God, right? I can tell you from my own personal experience, believers, that, I tried to live my life, according to how Andrea thought, she should live it, according to her own beliefs and her abilities. And I failed miserably. Then, I tried to, half step with God, right? Follow some of his laws and his commands, thinking I was doing better than most, right? But, really, truly, you're never going to be successful in life until you truly submit to God and follow all of his laws and his commands. You might make mistakes along the way, but you get back up and you get back on a righteous path. Don't intentionally stay out there in sin. So, continuing on, verse 12. And the Lord said to Moses, stretch out your hand over Egypt so that locust swarms over the land and devour everything growing in the fields, everything left by the hail. So Moses stretched out his staff over Egypt, and the Lord made an east wind blow across the land all that day and all that night. By morning, the wind had brought the locust. They invaded all Egypt and settled down in every area of the country in great numbers. Never before had there been such a plague of locusts, nor will there ever be again. They covered all the ground until it was black. Can you imagine? They devoured all that was left after the hail. Everything growing in the fields and the fruit on the trees, nothing green remained on tree or plant in all the land of Egypt. Verse 16. Pharaoh quickly summoned Moses and Aaron and said, I have sinned against the Lord your God and against you. Now, forgive my sin once more and pray to the Lord your God to take this deadly plague away from me. Moses then left Pharaoh and prayed to the Lord. And the Lord changed the wind to a very strong west wind, which caught up the locusts and carried them into the Red Sea. Not a locust was left anywhere in Egypt. But the Lord hardened Pharaoh's heart, and he would not let the Israelites go. So to conclude, believers, in the beginning, Pharaoh was so distraught by the locust plague that, he asked for forgiveness. Can you imagine? He almost sounded repentant, and agreed to let the people go. But then Pharaoh went back to his old ways and did a turnabout on his word with God as usual and did not release the people of Israel. So things just keep getting worse. But God keeps giving Pharaoh and all of Egypt really his mercy, right? That's the same way he does for us, right? He gives all of us opportunity after opportunity to come into obedience with him and his laws and his commands. What a merciful God we serve, So we will see later, believers, what plague God sends next, when we continue our study of Exodus chapter 10, part 2. So that will conclude us for this evening. And as always, believers, like and comment, and share on my posts. Tell me what you think. Tell me what you gleaned, or just, add on to some of the things that you may have picked up, along the way in your own study. And as always, read ahead and be blessed. Bye for now.